Hey everyone, welcome to the Texas Signal. We are continuing our series on sitting down and talking to all the U.S. Senate candidates on the Democratic side running in Texas. There are a number of them. Today we're joined by Sema Hernandez.
Yes.
Thanks for coming in.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
You bet. And so, look, let's just start with what's your story? Like, just to people who don't know who you are, who are you? Why are you running?
Well, it is a long story. For some people think 34 years is too short. But in fact, in 34 years, I've experienced more oppression than I can think of anyone in their 70s has ever actually experienced. So from a little girl, I remember my grandparents working in the tomato fields in Florida, in Waimama, Florida, and picking tomatoes with my grandmother as a plane would fly over us and dump toxic chemicals on top of us. So from a very young age, we've experienced that. And being a daughter of immigrants, a daughter of migrant workers, has really shaped the way I see the world. And for such a long time, I've accepted that this is normal for me, and this is normal for a lot of us. And when it came time for elections, it would just be the same type of people coming up and saying that they're going to do something for us. But once they were in office, they never fulfilled that. And I wanted to run for office to ensure that those promises are being kept and that those promises that I make are going to be kept. So coming from a very humble beginning and still being in that bracket where I'm still oppressed and I'm still silenced and facing adversity, it's one of the reasons why I continue to run. So anywhere from the migrant to work field to seeing ICE raids in the work field to experiencing the inequalities in healthcare, that's basically where my background is in humanitarian issues and human rights issues.
Well, and you mentioned a couple of things. One is healthcare, the other is ICE. And so I want to touch on both of those. You were present for Francisco Galicia when the 18-year-old American citizen born in Dallas who ICE detained for over 3 weeks. You were there when he got out of his detention camp. Explain that situation.
Well, he had been in a detention center for 3 weeks. He had his mother and his attorney present the documents to the detention center, and they wouldn't release him. And when we got wind of that story, we organized. So people from One Michigan Immigrant Rights Center contacted us so that we can start spreading the message all over social media. And that pressured the media to show up at the detention center on, I think it was a Monday or a Tuesday of last week. And that's when we arrived with the attorney. And we did a mini press conference. And as the press conference was happening, they released him. They released him. They didn't want us going in because the initial process and for releasing him was for us to go in. It would take a total of 40 minutes after we submitted the documents, which had been submitted more than 3 times, and then they would release him. Once they released him, it was strange because we saw this 19-year-old kid or 18-year-old kid walking in the parking lot, walking towards us, and we looked at him and I said, "Francisco." They said yes, and it was so heart-wrenching to see that they released him and that he seemed okay. But to me, I looked at him and I saw a reflection of my own child, of my own son. And it struck me so hard because he said, "There's a lot of things that happen behind those doors. I don't want to talk about it right now, but I'm so glad that I'm out. I finally get to see my mom." And right away, he got a phone call and he talked to his mom. Afterwards, we went to a restaurant nearby and we ate lunch. And that's when he, his lawyer, and I were discussing the things that happened to him behind those doors, behind those walls. And it was from the beginning to end at the Falfurrias, Texas checkpoint where they questioned him. He presented his documentation. They took it away. They wrote on his social security card that they needed to research to see if he was a real U.S. citizen. So to this day, those documents are still being held at that checkpoint center. And he was still put in a detention center for 3 weeks, no water for him to shower with, food that was not really food, but still in better conditions than the checkpoint where he was at. And for him to say they put me in a room and they tried to tell me to give up my U.S. citizenship and deport me. That's the definition of torture, coercion to a United States citizen who was born in the United States. for him to leave because they were racially profiling him from the beginning at that checkpoint.
Did you all at lunch or sometime that day or the next day discuss legal action?
Yes. Yes, I told them that, told him and his attorney that it would be great if they contacted the ACLU and Southern Poverty Law Center to file a lawsuit against the federal government, including the person who continuously denied that he was a United States citizen despite having his documentation. And I believe her name is Maria Garcia. She is the Border Patrol Assistant Counsel in that particular region. And she knew that this was happening. In the process, we also found out that his congressional representative, Vicente Gonzalez, when one of our organizers called him, he said that it wasn't unusual for South Texas to experience these types of actions when it comes to United States citizens. So anyone that lives below that border checkpoint is at risk every single time they cross it to come to this side of Texas.
Well, were you surprised that, actually I shouldn't say were you surprised, what was your reaction to both U.S. senators, both Republicans, Ted Cruz and John Cornyn, who stayed totally silent and said nothing when this American citizen, one of their constituents by the way, was being detained?
Well, I'm not surprised that they stay silent at all, because they keep pushing this rhetoric, this narrative that people are coming here illegally. Not anyone that is detained is probably because they're illegal, and that's not the case. That is not the case, and I think that a lot of it has to do with their own racism, their own bias, that they just do not want to address this because it destroys their entire narrative.
Back to your campaign directly. Healthcare is a major issue for you. Talk a little bit about it, and I know you used to work in the healthcare field. How does that experience inform your policy positions now running as for the seat?
Well, full disclosure.
Yep.
I also worked in insurance.
Okay, well you got both. You got both of them then.
Yes, I worked in insurance for different companies, and then I ventured out on my own. And I consistently kept getting someone who wanted health insurance, and I would tell them the health insurance is a little bit iffy because one, you'll get it, but then you'll probably be denied for certain coverages. And I told them that because I used to work in healthcare, and I know what the other side of the coin looks like when you are in healthcare, and certain procedures that are necessary life-saving procedures are being denied by insurance companies. So it's for me, Medicare for All is the only piece of legislation that I am going to support. I don't believe in halfway measures because at the end of the day, we do not need to continue upholding a for-profit driven healthcare system that denies people the right to certain health coverages that are life-saving procedures.
One of the arguments against Medicare for All is how to pay for it. Have you thought through how the U.S. would pay for it?
No, they can pay for it. There's absolutely plenty of money for it to go around. If there is enough money to build a wall, there's enough money to go to endless wars, there's certainly enough money to pay for this. With the money that we spend subsidizing the health insurance companies, that can totally be wiped out and put directly into the system that already works and it is already existing, just expanding it.
Switching issues for a second. So on the Green New Deal, you're for Medicare for All, Green New Deal, two very bold, progressive proposals, particularly for Texas. Tell me how you see those issues playing in Texas in your, should you become the Democratic nominee. I'm just trying to figure out, really, are those an asset to winning the nomination? Let's back it up for a second. Winning the nomination, or is it just something you believe, versus political expedience?
It's both. It's both. Living in Texas, and more realistically, living in the petrochemical industry area, which what I call sacrifice zones, because that's what we are. I'm a fence line resident living in a sacrifice zone, and my children go to school in Deer Park. My oldest son goes to, or will be going to, a high school that is within 1 mile of Shell Oil. And experiencing ITC firsthand, from the moment you get up and see that plume of smoke and realize a few hours later it's being reported on the news and no one told you about it because you found out through Facebook. Like, these are very real things that are happening in our neighborhoods and no one wants to talk about or amplify or even find solutions to. And if they do, they're actually letting the corporate industry take over. The petrochemical industry itself is a self-regulating industry. So in Texas, I know that the Green New Deal is possible, and it could be adapted regionally for the types of resources that we have. So there's plenty of land, there's plenty of sun, there's plenty of space for us to build a sustainable cities, sustainable environments, to allow for the environment to continue doing what it's doing without us disturbing it, and creating an economy that continues producing a type of energy that we can consume. And I honestly believe that this can be done on a larger scale and let the communities own it instead of an industry to own it.
Do you think that, speaking of money, we were talking before, no matter who you are running for anything in Texas, particularly statewide, you have to have money to win, whether it's low dollar donations, whether it's major donors or PACs or whatever. You said you're doing only no PAC money, right?
Well, I'm not doing any corporate PAC money.
Any corporate PAC money. So you've raised how much money so far?
About $12,000.
Okay, so those folks who are looking at you, any of the candidates, whoever the Democratic nominee is going to be has to have money to compete with John Cornyn. He already has, $9 million. There's a huge state. Money equals getting your message out. Mm-hmm. How do you plan on raising enough money to be competitive?
Well, that challenge, I faced it in 2018. It's a challenge I face now. When you are not bought and not handpicked by corporate Democrats, you have to continue spreading your message across anywhere you can, however you can. In 2018, we raised about $9,000. $5,000 of those dollars went for us to get on the ballot. $4,000 of those dollars were to me campaigning across the state.
For U.S. Senate.
For United States Senate against Beto. Right. I spent 1/10% of what he did, and I got 250,000 votes. He spent 4.5 million and got 680,000 votes. How did
you get that 25% of the vote?
Oh, secrets. Well, it's through hard work and dedication, and people knowing where you stand and knowing that you have the integrity and not ever waving from what you already stand for. So on our website, we clearly have our platform issues on what we want to focus on our agenda, and they are able to hold me accountable to that. Other candidates, such as Beto, did not have that type of agenda. It was very generalized, but nothing very specific on what they were going to do. And so that helps voters hold me accountable. That helps hold myself accountable to them. And continuing to spread that message in a very authentic way, and grassroots way, and not coming around with an entourage of people where I'm not accessible. I'm very approachable, and I am a very serious candidate, but I also have this sense of humor about me that it just helps people be more comfortable in having very candid conversations with me. And I give people my phone number, and they can call me, and they can talk to me about the issues without having any hesitation that there's going to be so many people, so much red tape to get in contact with me. I want them to know that I am accessible, and I want to earn their trust, and being that person for them is something that helped earn those votes.
Do you have any idea yet, excuse me, how you're going to, I assume you're going to participate in debates when they come around?
If they come around, because you remember last time, they said they were going to debate, and they never did.
Well, we're hoping to sponsor a debate.
Awesome.
But we'll see, we haven't even started to ask folks yet. I'm asking you now.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yes, hold me to it.
But I guess, so the debates is one thing. The other thing is, I guess, how do you see where you are in you have MJ Hagar, mm-hmm. right, out of Austin. You have Amanda Edwards in Houston, Chris Bell in Houston, Royce West in Dallas. Go ahead.
There's also Michael Cooper out of Beaumont.
Yeah, Michael Cooper out of Beaumont, sorry.
And Adrian Osenega out of, I don't know where, I think it's Dallas.
I think so too.
Okay.
But I'm not sure. So that's the whole field. Mm-hmm. Where if you were to have to place yourself, you don't have to. This is a typical media question, actually. Mm-hmm. On the spectrum, on the Democratic ideological spectrum, mm-hmm. where are you compared to those other folks?
Oh, I'm way to the left. To the left of the left of the left, I guess you could say. On every single issue that is considered progressive, I am in step with the progressive movement, and sometimes even ahead of the progressive movement.
And so you think that the nomination is still winnable with being so far to the left in a state like Texas?
Absolutely.
Why is that?
Well, because we're not just talking about these radical ideas that don't seem attainable. These are ideas that we are talking about that are viable. And I have gone into the communities that are predominantly red districts, and I've talked to voters who have voted for either Trump or Hillary, and they both agree on the solutions and how to get there, and that resonates with them, because at the end of the day, it's they want what's best for them, and I want what's best for them, and we're talking the same type of policies that will get us all there together.
We were talking before too about identity, and I wrote it down because it's a mouthful for me. It's Latinx, indigenous woman.
Yes.
Talk about how your identity informs either your worldview or why you're running now, and why it's so important that you are running for U.S. Senate in Texas.
Well, one, representation matters, but I've also said just because they look like us doesn't mean they're going to represent us. And so that in itself has to be said first. I myself come from a background that is very welcoming and loving and nurturing, and our culture is very different, of course, from the culture that we usually see right now in the corporate media. Is they're focusing on the polished politician and what they look like, and very streamlined. And the way I present myself, I identify myself, kind of sets the mood and the tone for how I am going to continue campaigning. Being that welcoming person, being a person who not only represents our culture, but someone who understands the intersectionality, the multi-generational gap that there is, and blending them all together within our campaign. And I am that welcoming person. And I tell people that this campaign isn't just for me. It is for all of us. And the only way we're going to get to accomplish all of those things on our agenda is if we are working together and we accept one another for who we are and as we are, instead of pretending to be something that we're not, and not letting other people or other corporate media label you. Like, I will not be defined by what someone else thinks. I define myself. I identify myself. I don't like people colonizing me. So I have accepted who I am, and the moment that I did, I was better able to represent the issues that matter most, from South Texas all the way up to the Panhandle. In South Texas right now, we're facing a border wall, and eminent domain is being used to build that wall. But what most people don't know is that that land is indigenous land, and that land is being used for a border wall to hide a pipeline. That's what it's being used for. And talking about that with people, with other people, and going down there with indigenous tribes and learning that, and then learning the history of the different treaties that were put together, there are so many violations happening. And once we're able to understand where the root cause of what these policies or plans or eminent domain comes in and takes away your land, once we understand that this is a plot to uphold a patriarchal system, uphold the white supremacy, and continue capitalism and exploit the land and exploit people, then you're better equipped to understand the history of how this country was built, and how the Constitution itself was to uphold white landowners' rights over everyone else's rights. And so when I identify as Latinx indigenous, it comes from a long process of decolonization and understanding where we're going to now. And so that helps me build policy and legislation to impact people 7 generations from now.
You mentioned the corporate media a minute ago. Does it bother you that generally, it's a generalization, but that the corporate media tends not to cover all candidates, whether it's in this race or others, equally?
Of course it bothers me. It absolutely bothers me, because they have this outlet, this vehicle to inform people. But when you're not including those other people that are running for the same office, you are now excluding people, and you're not allowing democracy to be practiced. And so that in itself gets in the way of an actual democracy from happening in this country.
It's been a pleasure.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you.
I talk too much.
No, you don't. Thanks for joining us.